Good evening, everyone. Welcome to ICA. It's a pleasure to have you here. My name is Gene Moreno. I'm the director of the Knight Foundation Art and Research Center at ICA Miami. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to our third keynote lecture. Our keynote lecture is part of our commitment to contribute in significant ways to the city's public discourse and cultural landscape. Every winter, ARC brings to Miami distinguished national and international voices to discuss relevant and pressing topics in our fast-changing society. It is also an opportunity for us to reaffirm our commitments to the topics that guide our lines of inquiry and that we hope aid in some way to the building of a more equitable society. Generous support for this program, as for all the programs and digital initiatives of the Art and Research Center, is provided by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. We thank them for their commitment to the program. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our board of directors, which has given us both the space and the resources to develop this ambitious program within the context of a contemporary art museum. Lastly, I want to extend my gratitude to Donna Anarpiche, who's somewhere in the audience, who worked tirelessly to make sure this was going to be a great night. It's an incredible honor for me to welcome tonight's speaker, Joy Harjo. In 2019, Harjo, a member of the Mvskoke Nation, was appointed 23rd United States Poet Laureate, the first Native artist to hold the position, and only the second person to serve 3 terms in the role. Harjo's 10 books of poetry include Weaving Sundown in a Scarlet Light, 50 Poems for 50 Years. That's her latest book from 2022. Along with it, she's also written An American Sunrise, Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings, How We Became Human, New and Selected Poems, and She Had Some Horses. She's also the author of 2 memoirs, Crazy Brave and Poet Warrior, through which she invites us to witness the heartaches, losses, and epiphanies that have characterized her poet warrior road. Harjo's edited several anthologies of Native American writing, including When the Light of the World Was Subdued, Our Songs Came Through, a Norton anthology of Native Nations poetry, as well as Living Nations, Living Worlds, her companion anthology as a signature poet laureate project. Along with this impressive poetic output, Harjo is an award-winning author in children's books, a playwright and a screenwriter, and a sought-after professor. She's taught at UCLA, University of New Mexico, University of Arizona, Institute of American Indian Arts, University of Colorado, University of Tennessee, and the list goes on and on and on. She's also an award-winning music producer and the saxophone and flute player for the Aerodynamics Band, with whom she has toured Africa, India, South America, and beyond. Among the awards she has received are a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Americans for the Arts, a Ruth Lilly Prize for Lifetime Achievement from the Poetry Foundation, the Academy of American Poets Wallace Stevens Award, a Penn USA Literary Award, the Poet and Writers Jackson Poetry Prize, 2 NEA fellowships, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and a National Book Critics Circle Ivan Sandroff Lifetime Achievement Award. So we got to work on that MacArthur. In addition to serving as a 3-term U.S. Poet Laureate, Harjo is Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets and is the founding board member and chair of the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation. She has recently been inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the American Philosophical Society, the National Native American Hall of Fame, and the National Women's Hall of Fame. So as you can see, we have a luminary amongst us, and this is going to be an amazing evening. So please, let's welcome Joy Harjo.
Mado, thank you. It's really good to be here tonight, and I've never done a talk like this before, and I would tell my students, don't start that way. Yeah. Don't start by apologizing or anything, but I'm happy to be here to tell a little bit of a story about Mvskoke people in the arts, and the title is Dreaming in Color, Mvskoke Family Artists Post Trail of Tears to the Youngest Wave. Prepare. You are a story fed by generations. You carry songs, grief, triumph, thankfulness, and joy. Feel their power as they ascend within you. as you walk, run, even fly to infinite possibilities. Let go of that which burdens you. Let go any acts of unkindness or brutality. Let go that which has burdened your family, your community, your nation. Let go that which has disturbed your soul. Let go one breath into another. Pray thankfulness for this earth we are. Pray thankfulness for this becoming we are. Listen now as earth sheds her skin. Listen as the generations move one against the other to make power. We are bringing in a new story. We will be accompanied by ancient and new songs and will celebrate together. I just want to say I'm a member of the Mvskoke Creek Nation. I came here from the Mvskoke Creek Nation Reservation, a member of Ogiabova Ceremonial Ground, and I'm happy to be here. When I return to this part of the world, I return in the wake of the work, words, and love of my great-grandfather, Henry Marcy Harjo, a Mvskoke Reverend Interim Principal Chief of the Mvskoke Creek Nation, a much-respected man in our local Mvskoke and other Native communities. He is pictured here with his wife, Katie Manahui, and two Seminole men whose names, if anyone knows their names, I've been trying to find out who they are. He had a home in Stuart, Florida, where he would bring his family every winter from the Mvskoke Reservation. Betty Mae Jumper, the first and so far only female chairperson of the Seminole Nation of Florida, would tell me about my great-grandfather and how helpful he was to the Fort Pierce Seminole community. He had, in 1917, he spoke to Congress on their behalf and on the behalf of Native peoples. He contributed funds and other assistance to the community. He had quite a job trying to figure out a spiritual path for his people during a time of great change, a time of ongoing cultural genocide. Within a few generations of the first immigrant settlements in this country, the population of Native peoples has gone from nearly 100% of the population of this country to less than 0.5%. We are not present as human beings. We exist predominantly in the form of stereotypes as sports mascots. Redskins is a deeply rooted image that is proving nearly impossible to dislodge. The term refers to the bodies of natives brought in for bounty by those who wanted us removed. This travesty of representation would not be allowed for any other cultural group in this country, yet for natives, it remains. Super Bowl, case in point. Even though there would be no America without us, without our contributions to the American form of democracy, to American arts, cultures, and humanities. We are not apparent in the cultural streams that establish and define American thought, art, and culture. We are not present at the table, though we appear perpetually at the table every Thanksgiving in false stories told to our children in educational institutions across the country. These false narratives of Native peoples continue a story of cultural genocide. We are in a crisis. These same false narratives have fostered a destruction of the natural environment in which we live, grow children, grandchildren, in which we make a world in which to continue. What joins the original cultures of these lands is a shared belief system in which we are not separate from the land or from the consequences of the stewardship of these lands. We are the land. Together, we move about with the knowledge that we are part of an immense field of knowledge and beingness where all have a place. Everything takes place in a spiritual field of becoming. Artists know that because we work directly with the creative elements of that awareness. The creative arts are an act of affirmation, even of sovereignty. It is how we confirm that we are human beings, that we are alive and making and breathing culture. And this is where we start and why we are here. The power of the creative arts to inspire, to renew mythic underpinnings that gird every culture, to carry unbearable history, to bear witness to the collective story in a very particular manner according to time, place, and intent. We can call culture back. This is one of my favorite stories when considering culture and how it continues to live. I am reminded of a Sukpiaq story told to me by a Sukpiaq anthropologist, Sven Hawkinson, who specializes in documenting and preserving the culture and language of his people. Years ago, as he was coming up, the people were in crisis. Their culture was nearly gone. There were no new native speakers being taught and fewer culture bearers. During the worst of it, Russian fur traders had lined up Sukpiaq and shot musket balls through them to see how many people could be killed with one shot. The children were torn from their parents' arms and held as hostages. One Tlingit man who loved a Sukpiaq woman learned their songs and taught them to singers from his village, keeping the songs alive to be gifted back when they would emerge from the destruction. Recently, the Sukpiaq songs were returned home by the Tlingit. There were many tears that day as Tlingit people sang the songs back to the Sukpiaq people nearly a century later. The Sukpiaq received the songs that they had thought were gone. The songs never died. They were living within this Tlingit nation, waiting to be gifted back to the Sukpiaq nation to sing again. Our cultures live within us, and we continue to grow and develop them in our arts. Sorry, this is out of focus. In 1879, Chief Standing Bearer of the Ponca Nation persuaded a federal judge to recognize Native Americans as persons with the right to sue for their freedom. He and his people were banished from their lands in Nebraska and sequestered on a reservation land in Oklahoma. During the move, over a third of their people died, including 2 of his children. Standing Bear and his band defiantly returned to their homelands in Nebraska. Under federal law at that time, natives were not considered persons and therefore had no legal voice. Yet, it was his eloquence in a federal courtroom that convinced a judge to grant him freedom. Nearly 100 years later, in 1974, I was a studio art major working toward my BFA at the University of New Mexico. 1973 was the stand of my generation of young Native people at Wounded Knee. Our collective front for the rights of our Native peoples found its way into our arts. All art expresses the condition of the soul or the spirit, whether it be the spirit of a place, a time, a country, a tribal nation, or a particular individual who in the end is an embodiment of time and place. I remember staying up late at night, making this drawing while my mind investigated questions of justice. I remember the lack of proper light in that student rental just off a busy one-way into town as I drew. I remember the percussive scratch of the pencil on the vellum paper I had bought specifically for this drawing. My ears kept to the sounds of my children sleeping in the other room. I didn't and don't usually play music when I draw or write. To do so distracts me from what I am hearing as I work. There is substance in lead and in the varying weights and construction in drawing pencils. There's the imprint in paper. There's the story, and that night it was the story of Chief Standing Bear I was compelled to draw. It was probably for a studio art assignment from my drawing professor, Nick Abdallah. It was more than that, however. It was an honoring. In retrospect, this drawing was an exploration towards a series I was beginning, a series that would showcase warriors. I would not depict them in the way natives were in history books. The warriors were all male and were only the ones known to the U.S. government because of their fight or friendship or both. Most were from the turn of the century at a moment of great upheaval in our tribal nations, a time of removal and massacre of the infamous motto, "Kill the Indian and save the man," a time when we were to disappear into the sunset of history. Not all warriors allowed their image to be replicated. There is no image of Crazy Horse because he would not allow an image taken of him. He and others of his generation believed that a photograph could steal your soul. Even my great-aunt Lois told me one day as we were pouring through the immense set of McKinney Hall prints she kept in her home, along with stacks of historical documents of our family and tribal nation, that a photograph could steal your soul. It makes sense in that everything is made of energy. The ink would not be arranged on the paper but for the interaction of light and shadow caught with a camera device, then manipulated and digitized and or printed, then distributed. When we see, the act of seeing engages in interaction that impacts, even slightly, those being observed. The energy of the photographer or artist is a key influence. And I have this image up here because I didn't, Crazy Horse didn't want his image up here, and it's just one of my photographs. Crazy Horse was a spiritual warrior. The word spiritual is overused and can sometimes appear trite. I use it here as someone who is engaged with the unseen in a manner that is meant to bring insight and knowledge for the benefit of all life. That was Crazy Horse. He would not have approved of someone carving out a stone mountain with his image in the manner of Mount Rushmore. He was a man who understood that he was in relationship with the earth. It would have pained him to know that a German sculptor had been cutting and dynamiting an image meant to represent him out of a mountain. I understand the impetus to honor on part of the artist a kind of counterpoint image to the president's heads on Mount Rushmore, but a better tribute would have been to leave the mountain alone and use the funds to foster arts for the grandchildren of Crazy Horse's grandchildren. When I was imagining my proposed warrior series, I wanted the observer to see us as human beings. And it was important to broaden the definition and image of what it means to be a warrior. The warriors in my series would have included someone like Wilma Mankiller, the first Cherokee Nation female principal chief, who is now in a quarter, Deb Holland, the Laguna Pueblo Secretary of the Interior, and this next idea of a warrior would also fit Deb Holland, an unknown single mother at one point in her life, an unknown single mother with children who raises them without help, even as she carries on traditional art making, or a young basketball player, or a tribal attorney, or Dana Tiger, one of our artists from the Mvskoke Nation who has continued to create and even change her style according to the progression of Parkinson's disease. These images would be celebratory. This is a contemporary warrior image created by the photographer Cara Romero, Chimawevi. The dancer is Cricket Romero, a Mvskoke Creek and Pueblo dancer, the niece of Dana Tiger. Her mother is Lisa Tiger, a writer, dancer, and conceptual artist. Their father was the renowned artist Jerome Tiger, 1941 to 1967, whose images are crucial to the canon of Oklahoma Native artists. I appreciate this statement by Cara Romero about her art. As an indigenous photographer, I embrace photography as my tool to resist Eurocentric narratives and as a means for opening audiences' perspectives to the fascinating diversity of living indigenous peoples. My approach fuses time-honored and culturally specific symbols with 21st century ideas. This strategy reinforces the ways we exist as contemporary Native Americans, all the while reaffirming that indigenous culture is continually evolving and imminently permanent, end of quote. I know of the power of arts personally and as a person of my generation. As a child growing up in Oklahoma, I was aware of our Native people as artists. In my home, I was inspired by the oil paintings of my grandmother, Joy Harjo, and in our local community, being an artist was something a young Native child could aspire to, as most of us had relatives who worked publicly and respectfully as artists. I grew up knowing about Jerome Tiger, Benjamin West, Solomon McCombs, and Maria Tallchief. Arts were what our people excelled in. It was expected of us. We were present in arts, though our history was not taught, and we faced daily discrimination. The earliest art images that surrounded me in our small post-war home in Tulsa was art collected by my grandmother, and that's her, Naomi Harjo Foster, born February 2nd, 1896. The art included a beaded Lakota saddle blanket for an honoring and 2 Japanese porcelain vases with exquisite and fine images. 2 images by my grandmother, Naomi, hung in the living room. One was an oil painting of the biblical story of Ruth and Naomi. The other was a charcoal drawing of hers that was a rendition of a very popular image of a black horse and a white horse in a storm. Naomi's charcoal drawing was copied from this Currier and Ives painting, Horses in a Storm, from the late 1800s. I found it was very popular. There were a lot of copies of this image. And this is my grandmother's version. It was rather unusual for a Mvskoke woman to be educated in European painting techniques. My grandmother, Fullblood, was born in Indian Territory at Tiger Flats, now New Yucca, in the Mvskoke Creek Nation Reservation. She died at the age of 34 of long-term effects of tuberculosis. Despite her short life, she and her surviving sister, Lois Harjo Ball, had earned BFAs in art from Oklahoma City University. My grandmother and aunt were afforded excellent educations because some plots of the family's allotted lands were located in rich oil fields. I was given this painting from my grandmother's estate. This is one of her paintings. It had been in storage at the Creek Council House Museum. It is an oil painting of Osceola, Seminole warrior who stood with his people against the U.S. government and refused to surrender. This painting, too, as most of the rest of her surviving art, are copies of other paintings or prints that were popular at the time. Copying artists was central to the pedagogy of art instruction. The same with this image of Osceola. This painting is Naomi Harjo's copy of a George Catlin's The Indian Gallery, Osceola of Florida, Indian Chief, 1838. What she chose to copy was not a classical European image. Rather, she copied a Catlin print that, along with the photographs of Edward Curtis, defined American Indians for the public in the late 1800s and early 1900s. I also later learned that he was one of our relatives related by marriage. My grandmother, and I can tell you how, but I won't go into it here. My grandmother painted Osceola in 1916. It's signed Naomi Harjo, 1916. She was a witness to the transformation of Indian Territory and the Mvskoke Creek Nation Reservation, which had been promised as a place of refuge for her family and her people. Yet the immigrants followed in a kind of free-for-all of scammers, settlers, and entrepreneurs when we were force-walked from our homelands in the Southeast. Our family were from what is now called Georgia, Alabama, and northern Florida. Shortly after removal, we contended with the Civil War, then the Allotment Act, which stole more land and resources, and then thereafter the Oklahoma Land Run, a giveaway for unassigned Creek and Seminole lands after the imposition of the Allotment Act. Then the Glenpool oil field was discovered and brought major oil pipelines into the Mvskoke Creek Nation Reservation. Some of the allotted lands of our family were located in the Glenpool oil field area. Many tribal citizens became millionaires, and much of the wealth was scammed by various means, as in the Osage story depicted in Killers of the Flower Moon. The title of that book and soon-to-be movie is the title of a poem by Osage poet Elise Passion, whose mother was Maria Tallchief. Then statehood in 1907 was imposed by those who flooded our lands, traded by a federal treaty. My grandmother and her generation witnessed this immense cultural shift, and for all her European-based education, she was still an Indian. I understand this choice of image. Osceola's story was widely known and admired by the Creek Seminole people. He was a representation of a stand against colonization, yet he was not alone in the struggle, which gets to the major challenge when depicting individuals as warriors. A true depiction of any warrior would include those in his or her family who mentored them and/or those who fought or labored alongside. That doesn't deny any individual effort, yet at the same time acknowledges that we are utterly linked. No one person can take full credit for a win or a loss. There are other people and circumstances at work. It wasn't until I was near 40 years old that I picked up a saxophone and began to learn to play, that my Uncle John Jacobs of Holdenville, Oklahoma, told me that my grandmother Naomi used to play saxophone, and he thought he might have her saxophone somewhere. In the early 1900s, when the saxophone was adopted by dance bands, more saxophones were sold in the mid to late 20s than guitars in the 1960s. It would not be so unusual that my grandmother would have a saxophone. Consider the image of a Mvskoke Creek woman playing saxophone in the very early 20th century. Put that in your catalog of images of Native people. There are many images that can replace the stereotypes that crowd out real human beings in the collective imagination of the American people. Consider Mildred Bailey, a Coeur d'Alene tribal citizen who was a top singing star in the 30s. Frank Sinatra called her his greatest singing influence. She was the jazz Beyonce of her age, singing and swinging on stages all over the world. Or the guitarist Jesse Ed Davis, Kiowa, Comanche, Mvskoke Creek, and Seminole. He played with Jackson Browne, Bob Dylan, and John Lennon, among others. He was known for his original guitar solos. Because my grandmother battled with lung problems until she was taken by pneumonia, I think of the saxophone as a healing instrument, helping her lungs, assisting them just as they have assisted mine all these years later. If I were to take up warriors again, with painting warriors, a series of warriors again, which I might do when I resume painting in the next few years when I quit traveling so much, I would most likely start with a Mvskoke Seminole Cherokee artist, Dana Tiger. I would include her because she is one of our best contemporary painters. She is the daughter of Jerome Tiger. Jerome Tiger was born in 1941, worked in oil, watercolor, tempera, Cassian, pencil, and pen and ink. Dana was 6 years old when he died of a handgun accident at the age of 27. He was quite prolific during his short life. I would paint Dana Tiger, Jerome's daughter, a warrior because she bears the qualities a warrior embodies. She is brave, humble, far-seeing, generous, and takes care of her art no matter what challenges her path. I first learned of Dana and met her through Cherokee Chief Wilma Mankiller. Wilma always remarked on Dana's art, which so clearly reflected the lives of local Native women and families of the generations in our Oklahoma communities. This is one of her earlier paintings. You can see much of her father, Jerome's, skill in line and natural flow of color. She inherited his meticulous natural handwork. And this is Tiger's adaptation to the constrictions placed on her ability to control muscular movement in her hands. Her measured strokes changed to accommodate the erratic jerks of Parkinson's. We and her community have witnessed that no matter how difficult the constrictions caused by the disease, she generously offers art workshops for children, studies, and passes on Mvskoke traditional knowledge, assists others who need help. She's humble, she's one of the bravest, as she moves with an attitude of humor and grace. Because my grandmother passed away when my father was a baby, my great-aunt Lois Harjo, or Lois Harjo Ball, took over in grandmothering me, and I still walk closely in her footsteps. I love this image. This image is from the Dallas Journal, January 11th, 1933, when she was visiting Southern Methodist University. She was a painter, made baskets, taught art, and worked at the Creek Council House. When I think of her, which is often these days, I return to the stories that I was told, the stories that I can't seem to remember or keep straight to the telling, like the ones I heard when I used to drive her around the Creek Nation to visit our relatives, all her age and older, the age I am now. Every day I miss her cultural knowledge of our people, her insight and humor. I miss the historical documents and family artifacts that crowded her small apartment that told of our family's history in the forced march from the South to Indian Territory. These stacks contained written accounts of family stories of bravery and justice, but left out the stories she told me of favorite black horses, horse magic, bending time, how to avoid the places the known conjurers lived, and of the Spanish man accompanying the people on the trail who wore a diamond pin that glittered as he sat tall on his horse. This is one of her paintings. This is one of Aunt Lois's paintings, and it always accompanies me through my life since her passing. It's a painting of a Taos man with a piece of pottery near a fire. She used to make many trips to the Southwest to paint with the Taos Artists Society, and was friends with many of the Pueblo people, including the potter, Maria Martinez, the San Ildefonso potter. I am now friends with her grandchildren. When I was with my aunt, I knew I belonged, and that in this circle of belonging, I had a place in the stories. Everyone needs this kind of place, this feeling of kinship. Without it, we are lost children, wandering the earth our whole lives, without a sense of belonging. Even a country can be like a lost child, because it may have no roots in the earth on which it has established itself. My aunt's spiritual presence remains, urging me forward to understanding and love, to knowledge given by her example. I like this one. This is another one of my favorite images of Lois, my Aunt Lois. I always assumed that she was styling in New York City in this photograph because I found correspondence that places her in New York City with arts organizations, but she could also be in New Orleans or somewhere in Europe where she traveled to study art. Art was natural in me, a constant, much because of the influence of my grandmother, Naomi, and Aunt Lois. I was slated to attend Chilocco Indian School for high school until my mother mentioned, while at the Indian Agency in Mvskoke, that I was an artist. The agent handed her a brochure of the new arts program at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. It was the 1960s, and the Cherokee artist Lloyd Keevan had a vision of fostering the talent of young Native artists and developing the field of indigenous arts. In 1963, Keevan and his team were instrumental in opening the Institute of American Indian Arts, or IAIA, and so began a watershed age of accomplishment and transformation, when Native arts and artists would achieve national and world context and recognition. I clutched that brochure of IAIA like a life preserver, made my application with drawings, and was accepted with that enrollment. I felt the kind of grace appear as an interception, an affirmation of a path toward a future. I left Tulsa for Santa Fe in 1967 when I was a few months into 16 years old. What I found at IAIA was a refuge, and more than that, a family made up of other Native students from all over the country and our arts teachers, all of us on the path together. In that incarnation of IAIA, because it's different now, it still comes out of that root, but we still had lined up against the wall in one of my classrooms, in a classroom I later taught in, stoves that had been used just a few years earlier to teach female students how to clean and cook for town residents. And out back, a dairy farm structure for teaching male students how to farm. The staff could be our biggest allies. I got up at 5 every morning to work the kitchen detail because of the Pueblo woman who ran the kitchen. We worked hard, but laboring under her diligent care and presence gave me a sense of family. The school's guidance staff pulled together when any of us went down. They were both our counselors and police. Every weekend was a challenge for all of us to make it through the rough terrain of historical trauma. Students went missing, overdosed, or broke down. We'd all help each other not get caught and to get back up. Our arts teacher were the finest available, and you can see many of them here, both Native and non-Native. We learned under the Apache sculptor Alan Hauser, painting and drawing under Fritz Schilder. Mission Indian studied traditional pottery with Ottilie Lolema, Hopi, and graphic arts with Seymour Tubus. Learned traditional techniques with Josephine Myers-Wapp, Comanche, theater with Roland Meinholz. Louis Ballard was Quapaw Cherokee from Oklahoma and a renowned composer of classical music at IAIA. He composed for Maria Tallchief, among others, and was one of the first to weave traditional tribal music with European classical styles. He was assigned as my advisor. When I started writing and performing music years later, he became one of my biggest champions. We were close, we were friends until he passed. What I learned as a student at IAIA in the late 60s became central to my consequent journey as a Mvskoke poet, writer, playwright, musician. We were that generation in the late 60s that began to change everything as we questioned who we were as young Native artists. We were inspired and directed to make our original art, born of major traditions, even as we were venturing out for fresh ideas and images. We were wounded, but it was in the wounding that we would find our strength. As we practiced our arts, we realized that we had a hand in revising the story of who we are as indigenous nations, who we were, and who we were becoming. We would come to learn that our indigenous arts and lifeways are crucial to a healthy and dynamic American story. There is no America without us, and our arts, the arts of all our citizens, show the way to a meaningful future. This is a Cara Romero image of IAA students, teachers, and leaders, and that she took in 2022, and I guess we couldn't, in the formatting, we couldn't get the whole image. You can go online and find the whole image. It's just 1/3, or a little more than 1/3 of the image. After I graduated from IAIA and had gone home to Oklahoma and to give birth to my first child, I returned to the refuge of Santa Fe. I reconnected with some of my old friends from IAIA who had either stayed in Santa Fe or moved back after we graduated. We'd often meet around a table in one of our homes, drawing together in our sketch pads, our children playing about us, and we'd talk about the state of Native art, our families, the emerging Native rights movement, and the love of our communities, their struggles. As we huddled over our art, our plates of food, our drinks, we'd tease and laugh, even as we discuss the times that were coming. We began to consider ourselves to be a kind of hybrid, not the confused, worn-out trope of Indians caught between two worlds, but committed artists rooted in our individual tribal nations who created with a dynamic process of cultural, conceptual interchange of provocative ideas, images, and movements. We agreed, for instance, that we could be inspired by Jimi Hendrix, by his artistry and his conceptual performance, which included burning his guitar, or by his discordant style of playing the Star-Spangled Banner. We could borrow or be inspired just like mainstream artists who have always shared across time and cultures. We could merge outsider sounds and ideas with our classical tribal expressions and make fresh musical art, just as Jim Pepper was beginning to do with his group, the Free Spirits. We talked about how our painting teacher, Fritz Scholder, was influenced by the painter Francis Bacon, whose images emerged from the shadow parts of a post-World War imagination. Those disturbed symbolic images fit our experience. We could find our own symbols and interpret racialized post-colonial rage to creatively express the despair of generational grief and loss. We would talk late into the night as our children dropped off to sleep on soft pallets made of blankets on the floor next to us or slept with their heads cradled on our laps. Finally, we'd go our separate ways into our lives. Yet we stayed connected even if we lost track. Our generation came in as a family. We will leave as a family. Yeah, that's me a long time ago, and one of my paintings. I began my studio art studies at the University of New Mexico during a time of burgeoning national and Native consciousness. In the long hours as I painted through the night, I would replay the stories and testimonies I heard in the meetings of our Native student organization, the Kiva Club, during messy meetings on campus. the stories we heard when we were out in the surrounding Native communities working for social justice. We heard reports of moral violations that were destroying our tribal lands, our relatives, our brothers and sisters, our lifeways. We frequently sat in meetings with the power brokers whose decisions would decide the fate of peoples, waters, and lands. As Native peoples, we were up against those who believed that power and value lay in the acquisition of lands, fuels, and natural resources. They believed earth to be a dead thing, meant only to be mined of anything that would bring money into the hands of the power players. Earth is a living being. We cannot own the earth. Rather, we are an essential part of the earth. Our relationship with the earth will decide the fate of our families, our future generations. To dig, destroy, take more than you need, and to do so with the intent to benefit a few is considered disrespectful to all, and more than that, extremely dangerous. I was impressed by the testimonies of the elder keepers of traditions, whose presences and testimonies were eloquent, never overreaching or of greedy intent. They spoke as protectors. They spoke humbly. The questions arise in me now, as they did then. Why do we continue to have to battle for protection of our homes, this earth garden? Why do the destroyers appear to have the odds, no matter which way we turn, for justice? It was in that listening where the impulse was born in me to turn to the making of poetry, to make word trails that could lead to justice. The awareness of language, the possibility of our own literary constructions as a tool for justice, survival, beauty, and persistence began to sing in me. I followed this impulse into poetry and music. During those times, as I worked, took classes, and cared for my children, I painted and wrote in the middle of the night when it was quiet. I would listen to my children's deep sleep breathing and the voice of the cricket who lived in the corner of the room. It was then the spiritual world greeted me in color, line, and meaning. There, my spirit would emerge dressed in love. I was no longer judging myself unworthy. I saw that wide circle of ancestors who gave me inspiration and strength to continue. It was not about me. It was about us. We are spoken to by the old ones through the arts as we make art and as we appreciate the artistic creations of others. Every age in my life is connected, and probably all of our lives is connected by drawing, painting, poetry, and art that inspires. I decorated my daughter Rainie's crib with reproduction plates of paintings by Monet, Chagall, and Degas that I unglued from my art history textbooks. One of my favorite paintings is what is known as the Chinese horse from the Mvskoke caves in France. I hung that on my wall. There are many stories and images that make coherent paths in the story field of my Mvskoke people, of my family, of these lands on which my people and I have made a path. From a point of view not yet possible, when we finally see it, we will see all of our paths merge as one large, intricate, and stunning image. Yet each of us carries a part of it. We express it in different ways. I intended to be a painter, and maybe I will head back that way, but my creative path took me to poetry, plays, music and speaking. As a very young grandmother in my 30s and a young great-grandmother, I have been privileged to witness the ancestor knowledge emerging in these younger generations, even as they create anew. My children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren bear out the promise and intent of our older generations. My children were frequently by my side as I studied at UNM and attended arts, political, and other cultural events. My daughter, Rainie Dawn Ortiz, comes from artists on both sides of her family. You've heard some of the arts genealogy from my side of the family. Her father is Acoma, and his mother, my daughter's grandmother, Mamie Toribio Ortiz, was an artisan. She made Acoma pottery that she sold to tourists. She is a descendant of Teofila Toribio, a well-known maker of Acoma pottery. Mamie Ortiz kept a book of her original designs and images that she worked from and added to. Some of her children and grandchildren carried and carry on her pottery making, including Kevin Saavedra, who is building off her designs. He's getting pretty innovative. I like watching his stuff and buying it while I can. My daughter Rainey is also inspired by her grandmother's designs, only she has employed them in a very different medium than clay. She is a bead worker. She learned the basics from an artist I brought over one day to teach the grandchildren. I didn't let them watch television. We did things. The same now, only it's cell phones and the internet. Rainey worked steadily and developed her craft and technique as she raised 6 children of her own and 3 stepchildren. This is the first of her pieces that I think made her place as an artist. This image is directly from her grandmother and distinctly Acoma. Rainey says her father told her that there used to be parrots at Acoma. They weren't colorful but were brown. When I spoke with Rainey about it, she made the point that dancers wear parrot feathers. There were and are still major active trade routes then and now between the North and the South. What makes Rainey's innovation unique is that the parrot design that characterizes her grandmother's pottery is now rendered in beadwork. What is mythical and historical finds a new context with a new generation and in turn regenerates culture. Every field of study has ancestors. There are poetry ancestors. There are pottery and beadwork ancestors. Rainey also studies and employs traditional art and design from Mvskoke people. This engraved shell gorget comes from the Mississippian culture of our early Muskogean people. Patterns like this one, the water spider with the wind symbol on its back, was a common design pattern found throughout the Southeast. One of the contemporary Mvskoke Creek Seminole artists she admires is the jewelry maker Kenneth Johnson, who also is inspired by art from our homelands. This is Kenneth Johnson's Mother Earth turtle design in bronze. One of Rainey's first paid commissions was a bandolier bag in the tradition of bandolier bags that our men began wearing in the 1800s. This is a traditional Mvskoke bandolier bag. Traditionally made by women and worn by men, these bags could carry pipes, tobacco, medicine, and flints for fire. Their central purpose, however, was to ward off danger and protect the wearer. The designs on these bags were commonly based on medicine plants, plants we had relationships with, as well as symbols of elements. This is Rainey's bandolier bag. She states that she beaded the bag. She did not make the bag. The bag was traditional in form, however, the designs, though predominantly Mvskoke, are mixed with Pueblo motifs and other original embellishments. And probably one of her most stunning accomplishments are her water spider medallions. I have one on right here. When the earth was covered with water, the water spider carried an ember on her back so we could make fire to keep the story going. I had never considered that there might be a cultural connection between Pueblo and southeastern peoples until some years ago when I traveled to Cusco, Peru. I was fulfilling a dream to visit Machu Picchu, the Incan citadel from the 15th century. The first stop was the old city of Cusco, over 11,000 feet high in the Andes Mountains. While in the city, I visited the Museo Inca to get a sense of the ancestral field of the original peoples there. The tour guide was informative as we walked through the rooms showcasing ancient Incan artifacts. When we stopped at one case featuring a stone lion of an indeterminate age, timeless, I could not move away. I waved the tour guide on and said I would catch up. A story unwound as I stood there in tears before this stone sculpture that had been weathered by centuries, had seen waves of generations. I did not quite understand my tears, except that I knew this lion represented a powerful connection between the North and the South, knowledge that still hasn't surfaced. The lion wasn't intricately carved nor otherwise a standout in all the items in the museum. It wasn't well lit or otherwise centered, but it carried a tremendous story. I respectfully took out tobacco for a blessing for the lion and then listened. What I came to understand was that in the time, before our current four-fronted knowledge, Pueblo peoples and Muskogean peoples were linked. Our naval court place was marked by the presence of this lion and the place from which the lion was taken. It was now exiled behind a glass cage. I began to consider that the glass cage had expanded to include all of us in a civilized field of hierarchical knowledge. We had lost the story still to so many of the images remained. They emerge in our dreams, find fulfillment in our arts. There are sister stone lions in the north in what is now called the Bandelier National Monument in northern New Mexico. They are at the edge of the Yapachi Pueblo ruins, now the province of Cochiti Pueblo. They are taken care of by the Cochiti and Zuni Pueblo peoples who know the details of their significance. This geographical sweep could explain the parrots on the Acoma pottery. As I think about how expression in the arts is carried through generations, I am reminded what different cultural and political environments my grandmother's generation, my generation, and my daughter's generation experienced, and how these forces shaped our artistic practices. My grandmother and great-aunt received classical training in studio art. They were encouraged to leave behind their tribal traditions, to embrace Western cultural ideas and standards. My generation broke that hold. I attended an all-native art school in which we were encouraged to explore our distinct tribal traditions. And my studio art training and studies in creative writing at the University of New Mexico came at a time in which Native peoples were embracing tribal sovereignty, fighting for it with our lives. My daughter has degrees in creative writing and in psychology. She has no formal art training except watching her grandmother make pottery in the village of McCarty's, New Mexico. I should not say except, as that kind of training is equal to arts training in academic institutions. It's just conducted at a kitchen table rather than in a university building. Rainey grew up being taken to art shows, poetry readings, and political events that showcase the accomplishments of our Native people. My children and grandchildren all have promise as creative artists. My son's daughter is Mvskoke and Cherokee. My daughter's children and grandchildren are Mvskoke, Acoma, and Navajo and live in Pueblo lands. They live in a very different kind of cultural awareness. Still, no matter in the larger public, we are still and remain Indian. One day, my daughter came upon my youngest granddaughter, Kaya Feather Chi, just like this. She had put on the horse mask I'd sent her and had arranged herself naturally into a conceptual art installation. She has a sense of design that goes beyond a flat 2 or 3 dimensional space. She was only 3 or 4 years old at this time. She often works next to her mother while her mother beads, just as my daughter drew next to me while I painted or wrote, just as I drew while I sat next to my mother while she typed out songs and sang. As I write this, I wonder about Lois and Naomi and their mother. What art, what creation. This doll is a recent creation by Kaya Feather. I am looking forward to what this generation calls forth in their creations. I believe generations come in as a kind of person. Together, this generation is witnessing political turmoil, the rise to power of those who would destroy democracy, a pandemic, major threats to world peace, and serious climate change that will result in severe water shortages and famine. This is a chaotic period, too, for Indian country, but I remind myself from knowledge gained from being a creative artist for many years that from chaos emerges the most creative visions. This is one of our young Mvskoke artists, Joy Harjo, who was part of the Mvskoke Arts Mentoring Program for young women that I helped start called For Girls Becoming. Many of the girls that participated in this program are now mentoring others. Now, there are a lot of Harjos, and we're not all related. And she was part of this program and worked with Dana Tiger. And at that point, she was in high school and started having arts workshops for students. And she's standing next to a dress that she made. And this dress features artists that have mentored her and influenced her, including on there she has, I think, her mother, her grandmother. She has my Aunt Joy Harjo, and I'm even on there somewhere. And she continues to make art, fashion, and other kinds of art, and it's and she's mentoring others. Mentoring is a natural part of the artistic process. Yeah, it turns out she's my little cousin. We're related through, you saw Katie Manahui, my great-grandmother, in that first, it was through her father was David Manahui, and his father was Manahui, who fought Andrew Jackson at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, and that's how I'm related to Louisa. But I didn't know that when she became part of the program. There are many fine artists in my Mvskoke world, in our native communities, across the country, and in this Western Hemisphere. We are here, past, present, and future, and make an ancestral field that is a living being. Our arts are how we know who we are, where we are coming from, and who we are becoming. We must continue to nourish ourselves with fresh images, songs, and stories. In turn, we must assist each other as we create, move forward in a way that honors this gift of life. This was a portrait. I've been doing insect portraits, so I asked permission first. But anyway, thank you so much, Mado, for this opportunity to speak about our arts in our community. Thank you.
Mic check, mic check. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Joy Harjo, for such a wonderful presentation. We're going to take a moment to do a Q&A. If anyone has any questions.
My friend and I are always talking about the future of the planet, and I'm curious if you have hope for the future of this planet.
So the question is, you're curious if I have hope for the future?
Of the planet.
Yeah, no, the planet will, she knows how to rejuvenate and renew herself. And we're seeing part of that going on right now. And there will be more of it. And, but the earth loves, you know, just like anyone, just like any of our relatives who shares with us. And people just want to be acknowledged or say hello, not just pass by them and not acknowledge or say anything. You know, I think our songs are part of that, can be part of that, the art we make, all of that.
How about humanity?
Oh, here's a question over here. Oh, I guess.
Hello. I have maybe a very specific question. I have a major collection myself of indigenous art from about 14 different tribes. It's all over the place. What should I do to help the native peoples with this art that I have?
Well, that could be, so, yeah, that could be useful. I mean, there's
one tribe in Canada that have 14 pieces, and I'm going to send it back to the tribe.
Yeah, I'm having...
Because they have a place to take care of it. But the rest of them, I don't know.
I'm having trouble hearing the... if I come out in front with that... Yeah, do that. Okay. Right. You want to see what happens if I put the mic towards that? No? Yeah. Okay, now, if you could ask again. I know you said you had a collection of art.
I have a collection of indigenous art, and the question is, what should I do with it that would be helpful to native peoples? And I mentioned there's one tribe in Canada, I have 14 pieces, and I'm simply going to send it back to the tribe because it makes sense. But I don't know what else to do that would be really helpful.
Yeah, make sure you know you line it up in particular with somebody who has knowledge in that community who can take care of it.
I pretty much do. So I mean, it's, yeah.
Yeah, so it would depend on the pieces, I think. I think it would depend.
It's mainly sculpture.
But yeah, giving back, or in a way that the community could enjoy it.
That's what I want. No, that's what I'm looking for. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would depend on what you have. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good evening. I'm so grateful for your work. When you were named poet and acknowledged in this country, I really was excited because, as you expressed, so much of the narrative has been changed. Currently in the schools, it's being ousted. Yeah. Teachers are being silenced.
Yes.
And with the opportunity that you have to bring awareness, right? It's healing, it's supportive. And like you said, the earth will continue even if we don't. So I really wanted to acknowledge and thank you for your work. And may you have many blessings, good health, long life, so that you can bring awareness to this land again. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's up to all of us to bring awareness. Really, it's a job. It's something, we're all part of this. We're all part of this. I call it the story field. We're all part of the story field, and central to our story field is we essentially are the earth. It's all about perspective and context, and the farther out you go, like that image of Earth, the NASA image of Earth, that's suddenly there was all these terms like holistic and all of that when that image was released, because it was a way people finally saw that, oh wow, this is a planet, this is us. And there was a major shift when that happened. And yeah, we need some major, we are in a major shift, and I think that was maybe part of the turnaround.
You had a question?
Yeah, there's hands up here and in the
we
back.
We unfortunately only have time for one more, but.
Thank you for the beautiful talk. Could you describe your creative process when those moments before you begin a work in any media or in writing? Are you listening, or what are you doing at those moments?
Every work is different. Doesn't matter if it's a poem, if it's a song, if it's, I just finished a musical play. I'm going to start where I've got some of the music, which centers around a young Mvskoke Creek band that will show that Southeast Native people were part of the origin story of blues and jazz. But a lot of it's listening and being quiet and, unplugging and just feeling out. Sometimes a sense will overtake me or something, or sometimes I just start going and it's there. But it's all really different. I keep thinking of, because, I get the cell phone thing, I'm trying to wean myself of a lot of this stuff. And I always remember my granddaughter, Desiree, she was about 8 years old, and she came to me, she says, Nana, she said, the angels used to come and talk to me every night, and now they say they can't talk to me because my sister has her computer on listening to music. And there you go. And I said, well, maybe you could talk to your sister and say, you maybe, trade off. You can do music some nights and then have other nights where she's not playing her music all the time. But that's kind of it. I mean, you can call it angels, the old ones, we all have, there's nourishment of our bodies, but we also, how do we nourish our minds and how do we nourish our spirits? And in a way, she was getting spiritual nourishment that way. And sometimes to get that, you go out in the world and go out into, unplug and be with the water. You got some amazing trees around here too. I've visited, and so on. But that's part of it. And I used to see the creative process as kind of a call and response. Like sometimes I'm writing or I'm singing something or doing something and something I do not, that's when the best stuff happens, with innovation. I remember writing, I don't like to write, I'm a romantic at heart, and I was writing away something very difficult in Poet Warrior, my second memoir, about a stepfather. He was very difficult, and it was after his funeral, and I was sitting outside his and my mom's home, which I had never visited because I was banished for speaking the truth. But I was sitting out there with my stepsister, who was about my mother's age. She was like a mother to me, and trying to make sense. I was trying to understand his life. I was trying to understand how, and I was writing about that time, and suddenly this line came out, and it really surprised me. It said, "Even the monster has a story." And I said, whoa, I hadn't thought of it that way. And so I thank the creative spirit, for that. But we all have, we're all creative beings. We're creating our lives. Some of us are very creative when we create our lives. But keep in mind there would be no story or no art or anything without challenge, without conflict, without something to be learned. And we don't, we humans usually take the hard road when it comes to learning. So that's the last question. Thank you. And thank you for the museum and everybody that had something to do putting this together, and thank you.